All right, y'all, so last week we did such a good job painting our symmetrical leaf, and we used warm colors to paint last week. This week we're gonna use the cool colors. Okay, so cool colors are blue, and I've got a light blue and a dark blue, green, and I've got dark green and the lighter green, and purple is a cool color too. So blues, greens, and purples are cool colors, and we're just gonna use those to paint our negative space. Negative space is what we call the background of our artwork, and we are going to just keep on practicing our watercolor technique. So one thing that I like to do, and this is called wet on wet, and that's where you just kind of paint with water section by section. So I'm gonna paint with water up here in this little corner, right? And what this is doing is just getting my paper wet. Then I'm gonna get some paint on my brush, and I'm getting a little bit of water, a little bit of paint, just to coat my brush. And remember what I told y'all last week, then go ahead and get one more quick dip of water so your brush is nice and wet and loaded with paint, and you're gonna put that down on the wet area of your negative space that you painted. This is called wet on wet, and this is kind of what we're working on today. And it's a neat way to observe your colors kind of blend and move around on top of that wet area. So look, here's another area. I'm gonna paint it with water to get my paper wet, and this time I'm gonna get a little bit of this blue, just a little bit of that blue. And before I put that brush on my paper, I'm gonna go for one more dip in the water, and then I'm gonna put it right on top of this area that I got wet. And it's really kind of fun to see how that color moves around and blends in with the color that I painted next to it. Okay, I'm gonna time lapse it so that y'all aren't watching me paint and talk for a real long time. Wet on wet, and we're using cool colors in our negative space. Okie dokie. Okay, so I finished painting my background. Now I want to show you a super cool, kind of like magical watercolor trick that you can try at home, because I bet you have this at home. All you need is a little bit of the magic ingredient, salt. Okay, so this is kind of a science and art experiment. If you look, I'm just gonna sprinkle a tiny bit of salt in my hand. You could probably use your salt shaker and wouldn't even have to make a mess. But this works best when you have big, wet kind of areas of watercolor, which we do because we used that wet on wet method. So like, see up here how there's kind of a little pool of water? What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put a tiny bit of salt on there, and the salt kind of absorbs that watercolor, and it kind of makes this really cool, like crystally texture underneath on top of the color. So this is a fun trick to do, and if you have a little bit of salt in a salt shaker, I hope you get to try it, because it makes this really beautiful texture, almost like crystals underneath your watercolor. There's a little bit right there. Okay, so look, I'm gonna try and lift this up so y'all can see close up what that salt does, how it's kind of absorbing the watercolor and leaving a little crystally texture underneath. It's really pretty, really fun to do. Hope y'all get to try it. This lesson, it's 2 parts, so it takes a little bit longer, but man, oh man, does it pack a lot of learning, right? Okay, let's talk about it. First of all, today we talked about negative space, right? Negative space means the background, the area behind your positive space. The positive space was the leaf and the negative space is the background. So we learned about negative space today. We did more watercolor practice. We did the wet on wet method where we would paint with water and get our paper wet and then put that watercolor paint on top, and it makes this beautiful kind of tie-dye, washed out, colorful look. So we learned about wet on wet. We learned about cool colors, right? We learned that warm colors are reds, oranges, and yellows, and that's what we used in our positive space. And then we learned that cool colors are purple, green, and blue, and that's what we used in our negative space. So check for cool colors. And we learned about salt magic. What happens when you put a little bit of salt on wet watercolor? It makes a very beautiful texture. So we learned about salt on watercolor. So much art education, so many new terms and vocabulary words, and it just makes such beautiful artwork. This is one of my favorite lessons. I hope y'all enjoyed it too. Thanks. Bye. These are some completed projects by some 7th and 8th graders, and I just thought y'all might like to see what some of the hallways are looking like at school right now. I'm hanging all these up and they are just gorgeous, and guess what? I can't wait to see what yours look like when you get finished, so make sure you send me a picture. Bye.